ancient peoples had an intimate knowledge of their environment. As we know, in the rainforest, the Indians know everything about every growing thing around them, what can be used for healing, what can be used for visions and so forth. And in just the same way, we should expect them to have been very observant about changes in mind state, different effects, different phenomena that might occur near this rock, on that mountain peak, by that river, near that spring, or whatever it might be. And these are the places, their landscape was inhabited by spirits. And so when we look at ancient sites, really we're looking at a spirit geography that maps out this understanding of the landscape. We might now translate the word spirit as a geophysical phenomenon, but it's the same basic thing, and it has the same effect on the mind, the spirit, and the psychology. The aesthetics of these places are also important.
Diary. Like magnetic tape, why wouldn't the Earth be a recording and storage device? How could it not be? Or maybe when I saw the ghost, I was being influenced by people close to me in ways not yet understood. My daughter. There's a theory that poltergeist phenomena is sometimes attracted by adolescent females. Perhaps my wife Anne, or my son. Michael Persinger.
We do know that complex fields can be generated from the body, from the muscles, from the brain itself. The intensity is always an issue. But if the environment is optimal and we have individuals who are highly sensitive in terms of brain activity and the capacity to discern these fields, then it is very likely, both in terms of neuroscience and in terms of empirical observation, that these individuals would influence people around them, particularly in close proximity.
Our brains weren't just stimulated because the dog heard that sound too.
This is my wife, Anne.
It wasn't just in our head. The dog heard it. He started to bark like crazy when he heard that knocking. We heard it too, and the dog heard it as well, because the dog woke us up with that knocking, because he was barking like crazy. I've never seen the dog bark like crazy. The other thing too is, when we were in that house, the dog would go downstairs while I was upstairs watching TV, and he would start to bark for no apparent reason. And I would go down and I would do a tour of the house, and there was nothing going on outside the house or in the house.
Odd phenomena, like hauntings, are sometimes reported in locations that run over or are near underground streams and sources of water. The sunken earth under the house in Canmore and the proximity to the water table from the Bow River might have created the conditions for geomagnetic activity and a subsequent release of EMF, which would induce a feeling of a malevolent presence. But it still doesn't explain the rappings which frightened Anne and me, and the simultaneous barking of the dog.
The report that you gave would be consistent with an increase in tectonic strain associated with differential water levels, hydraulic loads on the local river system. You happen to be living in a place that's a focal point, and as these phenomena occurred, and they would have occurred statistically, it would have been an unusual place with all types of aversive features to them, and sometimes there would be more intense stimuli than at other times. You effectively walk through and into one of these transient fields that stimulated your brain and produced the experience of the haunt.
Every so often, I'll get calls from people who are having poltergeist activity in their house.
Dean Radin.
And what I've noticed is that a neighbor won't tell the neighbor next to them that this is happening because it's either frightening or they'd be embarrassed to mention it. But I get those calls, and I have found that a number of times that neighbors within the block of each other who don't know each other, but I can tell from where they're calling that they're in the same general vicinity, out of the blue, they'll start talking about poltergeist activity. And they will interpret it according to whatever culture they come from, but it's the same kinds of phenomena. And so I'm thinking there's something physically located. It could be underground, it could be above ground, we don't know what it is. But the environment has changed, and it affects us, because we're electromagnetic creatures, and we will interpret it according to how we wish to interpret it, in a sense.
If the phenomenon is primarily electrical in nature, odd smells will occur, quite measurable odd smells, not indirect odd smells, and odd tingling sensations or the feeling of a presence. But then, of course, there's the interaction with the brain that then produces the richness of experience and the fear that produced the haunt. The interesting thing about the haunt, it's almost always associated with fear, whereas the poltergeist phenomenon is rarely associated with fear on the part of the experienced.
If you look at poltergeist activities, or especially a few cases where people hear loud, really loud noises, deafeningly loud noises, but a person 2 feet away won't hear it. And objective equipment won't pick up anything, suggesting that these loud crashing noises, which are deafening, are in the head somehow, and they're localized in the head. People will, first of all, probably be subjected to some kind of external influence, and they interpret it differently. So in the medieval times, it was interpreted as the dragging of chains, and people may even have eventually seen a ghost with dragging chains, because that's what they knew. Today, we might think of it in terms of a UFO landing on the roof, because we have some physical effect that's occurring, but we then attribute it to all kinds of different things.
Well, yes, on the Wellington Crescent in Sudbury, there was a report of an unusual phenomena occurring. Like most of these phenomena, it was communicated privately because people are afraid, particularly professionals are afraid to be called crazy or to have their reputations adversely affected. So we basically recorded the information. We went in with a seismograph and EM detectors, electromagnetic detectors, and a few other pieces of equipment to accommodate for possible sleepwalking and malingering, other types of artifacts or confounding variables, and found that there were clear electromagnetic surges taking place in the bedroom within which people were experiencing the haunt-like phenomena. Some people saw a ball of light, others felt the presence of something, still others saw apparitional outlines. And what was particularly interesting is that when these phenomena occurred, the experiences would be so fearful that people would leave the apartment, run from the apartment, and we could tell by the impact on the floor, and it was coincident with the EM surge on our equipment that indeed these people were leaving. So their verbal reports matched the actual data. Then we begin to realize that perhaps many types of haunt phenomena may be natural electromagnetic fields, transiently, briefly generated for about 10 seconds, focused. In fact, these fields were enough to bend the pins on our recorder. We estimated maybe 200 Gauss, which is quite significant for a natural phenomenon. And interestingly enough, at the same time, we know the area in Sudbury was under tectonic strain because that was the same year, within the same month, as the only major UFO flap in Sudbury's history.
It's now within the realm of scientific possibility to create an imaginary memory. But the notion of a counterfeit memory, an experience one thinks is personally unique, yet isn't, smacks of the best propaganda, a hidden persuader that is completely invisible. Imagine yourself in the grips of a pitched battle. Death or life is but moments away. Suddenly, your opponent zaps you. Your temporal lobes are bathed with a targeted blast of EMF, forcing you to succumb to an even greater terror, your mind. Military black science has long been rumored to be working towards such weaponry, but it's the next generation of computer gaming software that's more likely to bring it home. Present-day virtual reality is a mere toy compared to proposed systems which stimulate that big theater inside your head.
The difference between the present technology and virtual reality is the fact that when you're experiencing virtual reality, you know that it's not yours, that it's not coming from your brain, somebody's generating it. But if you begin to tap the very neurons that generate your sense of self, you can't tell the difference between a real experience, your own experience, and that being created by an external force. So the application of this technology in terms of mind control is powerful because if you access those neurons that generate your sense of self, it is real, and it is perhaps the greatest of all fearfulness because you can access those neurons that control your sense of dissolution, your fear of death, your fear of your loss of self. And if you access those neurons, it would be totally devastating and incapacitating.